Hi there, my name's Andy Young. I'm one of the automotive lecturers down at Unitec in Auckland, in New Zealand. And this is a continuation of a previous video where I have stripped out, completely stripped and gone through testing individually all the internal components of a Nissan Patrol starter motor off a TD42 engine. It's a reduction type starter motor, and we previously checked the armature, we checked the brushes, we checked the solenoid, we checked all the mechanical components of the starter. It was really badly corroded. It had been in the sea, the guy had been driving through the sea. I've extensively cleaned everything, and now it's time to do the reassembly. So this video is going to cover the reassembly of the starter motor and a final bench test before we actually put it back on the vehicle. Okay, so everything's been cleaned up. We've got rid of all the crap, and I'm going to show you how to put it back together properly. Here we go. Right, so we've got the end casing. First job is to reinstall the pinion with the one-way clutch in there, and we're going to need some grease because we've got this element here which it was very dry in there. We want grease on those splines in there. Look, the helix, we'll put some grease on there, and on this side here too, and of course on the gears. So a bit of grease in there. Now, it looks a lot at the moment because it's going to get moved around a bit. Okay, thanks. Let's see if we can get rid of that. There we go. Put the grease in there, look. Just a lithium based grease is fine. Oh, that's better. It's a lot better. Great stuff. Okay, we'll put the end cap back on again. There we go. And now we want some grease actually on these teeth themselves. We don't want tons of grease, but we do want some on there. There's no method of lubrication for this component. There's no oil supply, anything like that, so what we put in now is what's going to be there forever basically until it's stripped again, but hopefully it won't need to be stripped for a while. Pretty sure the guy's not going to go back in the sea again after all these problems. There we go. Maybe not quite so much there, look. Okay. Stick a bit on the end where the arm connects as well. Right, so that can now go back down into the casing. Twist it round. Push that down. There we go. Right, we've got some screws to go on there. Dum dum dum. Right. Stick those back in. Now we're going to work this casing down so it stays parallel. It's quite a tight fit. Took a bit of getting out. So we'll get all the screws in first, and then we'll just tighten them up progressively. We don't want to crack that aluminium casing. That would be catastrophic after all the efforts we've put into trying to save this starter. Now, starter motor design varies an awful lot. This is just one example. Obviously, if you pull your own starter off, it's probably going to look a little bit different to what this one does. They pretty much all work under the same principle. And what I suggest that you do is just take pictures as you take the thing apart, and that's going to help you to reference where things go and what orientation and which way around things go. Because the last thing you want to do is get it all built up, bench test it, seems okay, put it on the car, doesn't work. That's pretty demoralising, to be honest, and I've been in that boat a few times and I've learnt my lesson. Take pictures. make notes. Pretty important. Right, there we go. Okay, so that's all back together again now. Pretty free. That's good. Now the next stage is to put in the armature. Now, as you can see, I've cleaned up all the rust off the actual armature itself, off these little tiny plates that are all pressed together, and I've cleaned up the commutator, and that came up really, really well. Now this passed all its electrical tests and all the mechanical tests too. You know, all these teeth are all good. They're going to mesh into where the large gear, the reduction gear, we've just put some grease on. And this bearing here is also been checked, and that's really good condition too. It looks a bit rusty from the outside, but the bearing itself is good. So now we can just drop that down there. It was quite a tight fit getting out last time, so we're going to need to give it a bit of a tap. Okay, almost there. And you'll hear a different sound when it gets to its gets against the shoulder. There we go. So that's all the way home now. Cool. Okay, that bearing is a bit rough. Yeah, it is a bit rough actually. I think some of that noise is coming from the gears, but it's still very free, and it's going to get the guy mobile again. And you know, I don't think he's planning on keeping the vehicle for forever. If it was my own vehicle, sure, I'd have bought all new bearings for it, I'm sure. Now this fork is the one that pushes the actual pinion into mesh. And that sits in there like that. So what we'll do is we'll give it a little bit of grease just to help it move around a bit and do what it needs to do. Especially on the little heel there, look, because it sits on that heel against the casing. Okay, so I'll drop that down there. There we go. Okay, great stuff. Okay, so once we've got the armature in place, the next thing to fit, believe it or not, is the solenoid. And we need to get that put in now, because this particular one is really awkward to get in if we try and do it after the motor. Okay, so the base of the spring here, you can see where it's been a bit worn, that needs to fit into the groove on this arm. And the top of the arm, up here look, needs to go through this square hole at the end of the plunger. It's very important that we get both of them lined up. If we don't do it properly, it isn't going to work. So first job, we'll just thread that through there, like that. And then we've also got, there we are, look, a rubber grommet to fit, which is this one here. That just fits neatly under there. That's great. We'll just check we're all good with a torch. Yeah, we're on. Okay. So now, if you find the bolts, the two long M6 bolts that retain, there we go, look, retain the solenoid in position, and we can get that bolted up now when it's done. Right, have a little spanner. There we go. These should be about 10 Newton meters in torque as regards tightness. And once this is bolted up, there's nothing to stop you if you want, just double checking that the solenoid is actually working properly. And you can put a current through it to actuate those windings again, just to check that it's throwing the pinion into mesh, then it's not misaligned. Okay, so we can put our ground onto there, bit of power, and you can see it's pushing it into mesh really well. Quick check just before we go any further. Okay, so we know the solenoid's working properly, and now we can fit the casing, the field windings. If you look inside there, they were so badly corroded that I've removed the inserts. You can do that by undoing these screws here on the outside, and I did them one at a time, and I gave them a really good clean up and got rid of all the corrosion, because there is only a very small gap between these and the armature itself, and the reason for that is they need to keep it really close because it maximizes the power of the starter motor. Now again, remember, we've got a mark that we must align, and on here the mark is just here, look. Okay, so we'll drop that down, align that, and it drops into place. Excellent. All still moving freely. Remember, that was seized solid before. And next step is to fit the brush pack. Now the other two brushes are all nicely freed off. They're all good to go, and I've cleaned out the other brush holders, and I've cleaned these brushes as well, so we can install this and then clip the brushes into place. There we go. Okay, so next job, let's just see if we can get those brushes in. Right, so I've got to lever the spring out of the way, and then hopefully we can just slot that brush straight in there. There we go, that's one. And for the second brush, which the holder's just here, look, just lever the spring back out of the way, and then we can just drop that brush, hopefully, there we go, into the holder, and lower the spring back down. Don't let them snap shut, because at the end of the day these brushes have a pretty hard life, they're quite brittle. Okay, cool, just a quick double check around, make sure everything's good. Okay, have a quick scan around, make sure that all the brushes seem to be seated properly and there's no contact between the brushes and the commutator, the brush holders, sorry, and the commutator. Make sure it's all set where it should be. Really important that you check now at this point, because if there's some short circuits in there, or a short circuit, it'll fry and you won't have a starter motor. So the next step is to install the end plate. Now there's 4 holes on the back of there. 2 of them, the smaller 2, are to hold the brush holder in place, and the larger 2 are for the big bolts that run all the way through the casing. And the first ones to go in are with the brush holder, because we need to sort of jiggle this around a little bit to align the bolt holes. Put those little screws in. Don't do them tight, just get them in, and then we can move the whole thing together to get the big bolts to go through. Okay, so we get the holder, and again we've got some markings on there because we want the drain to be in the right place. It's nearly gone. Okay, and the markings around this side here, so we just drop that down very carefully into position, and we can just rotate it until we can get the 2 little screws threads to line up for the screws that are tapped into the back of that backing plate. Now if you find that it's a bit misaligned, you can always use your scriber and just carefully align things, and then you can get the screw put in there. There we go. Okay. 1, 2. Now again, you don't have to tighten them up fully at this point in time. The next step is to get the large long bolts in, and just a bit of jiggle room is always a useful thing. We'll just jiggle that around, make sure everything's lined up. There we go. And always start these with your fingers. Don't just crank them straight in with a ratchet, because you might tear the threads. They're just a really fine thread. There we go. And again, tighten them up evenly, you know. You want the whole thing to be nice and true. and aligned properly. Make sure your alignment marks are good. Yep. There we go. And don't over tighten them either, because they're only a little M5 thread into the aluminium. I'd say about, 8-10 Newton meters should be enough. Do a final tweak on these, just to set the brush pack nice and tight onto the rear cover, because don't forget that brush pack needs to be really well earthed. All the current flow for this entire starter motor is going through that brush pack carrier and making contact with this end plate here, and if it's loose it's going to arc. If it arcs, you're going to have problems. Okay, and lastly we've just got to fit the starter motor wire. That's the main feed wire that goes into the motor. Now before we do that, we can test the motor itself. It's always good to do diagnostics, so we'll just get our battery and jump leads again. Now we can put the negative onto the casing of the starter. There we go. And we can bring the positive round. Fantastic. Okay, so we know the motor works. That's good stuff. So the next job is we'll just put this wire on. Now there's two washers on there. Pretty sure we want that either side of the one washer either side of it. Give it a good contact, and we'll get that cranked up. It's always good to test your starter as you build it back up again whenever you can. And you can easily find faults and then just, see if you can fix it before you get the whole thing back together again. Okay, so that wire's now on. Get the cap put back over again. There we go. Okay, so that's the starter motor back together, and we've tested the solenoid on its own as we did the build, and we've tested the motor on its own as we did the build. We need to do a final test to make sure that it's working properly, that everything's working together, and we also need to check, don't forget, that one-way clutch. So we'll need to get a bit of wood and try and stop that pinion from turning just by holding the wood against it when we energize the starter. Okay, so with our jump leads, we've got them rigged up to a 12-volt battery. We'll just put the earth to earth. We'll put the positive one onto the input terminal, as if, the battery positive terminal of the actual unit. Stick that on there. And then all we need to do with a screwdriver is bridge across from that main input terminal, the top terminal, the one with nothing on it, onto our trigger terminal, and that should energize the starter. And we should see, there you go, we can see the pinion. The pinion's firing out all the way, which is good. Now I used to do, when I was building these up back in the UK, I used to do the 10 click test. So it has to do 10 actuations without any misfires. So cool. Right, so there's one more test to do, and that test is to check that one-way clutch, because everything so far is good, but if that one-way clutch has failed, then we're not going to be able to get any torque transferred through that pinion. Okay, so I've moved it around the device so you can see what's going on, and again, as I energize the starter, you can see that the pinion is firing out and it's turning. Now, you mustn't just try and hold it with your hand, because these things are pretty powerful and you'll just damage your fingers. So I'm going to use my screwdriver out the switch, and I'm actually going to hold that pinion with the wood. Extremely difficult to stop that pinion from turning. There you go. So you can see there's a lot of torque being transferred. And that's a really good test to make sure that the one-way clutch is working properly. Success! As always. Well, not always actually. So the starter motor, rebuilt it, showed you how to put that together again. And we've bench tested it. And the starter motor itself, the actual motor component works. The solenoid is working great. And the one-way clutch is working great too. The whole thing is operating as a complete unit. And it can go back in the car. And the student will be able to start the engine on his vehicle again. Good old Nissan Patrols. Okay, now, like I said earlier on, starter motors do vary in design. There's a number of different kinds out there. But most of them work under the same principle. You know, you've got your armature, you've got your brush pack, you've got your field windings, bearings, all that kind of stuff. It's all in there, you know. Solenoid, they all pretty much work the same. So the way that I tested the solenoid, we did it a couple of ways. We did a continuity test on the pull-in winding, a continuity test on the hold-in winding. I actually energized both windings as well, so we could actually see the plunger being pulled in, you know, visually. They're not too hard to work on as starter motors, and it does seem a bit of a shame just to throw one away when it's not working and go and buy a new one, because they can be pretty expensive. And this has cost nothing to fix other than a little bit of time, probably about 4 hours all up. It does take a little bit longer when I'm filming, but about 4 hours. A good 2 hours was spent cleaning the components up because it was pretty rough. But hey presto, it's done, and as is another couple of good videos for the channel. So I hope you found that helpful. If you did, and you want to watch more, there's heaps on the channel, but why not subscribe, and then you'll get notifications as and when new videos get uploaded as well. If you have any questions or comments, I'm sorry I can't give you specific specifications for a particular car that you've got. You will need to look that up yourself on the internet. I was on the net this morning and I found 3 different genuine workshop manuals for the Nissan Patrol range. Eventually I found the one with the correct engine that has this starter motor in it, and I downloaded that for free. The manuals usually are out there. There's plenty of websites that will charge you. I think emanuals.com is a pretty good one. But you know, they are there. You've just got to spend a little bit of time trawling around, and it's best to do that first. If you know you've got a problem and you want to test something, find the manual first and then pull it apart, because then you know what you're looking for, and the manual will give you a few hints on the tricky bits, the quirky bits for your particular starter motor. Obviously in this video I will have put all the specs and various test procedures as well, so you'll have all of that, so you're not just watching me do it, you'll actually be able to see diagrams of how to do it as well. Okay, well, thanks for watching. My name's Andy Young. I'm one of the automotive lecturers down at Unitech in Auckland, New Zealand, and well, cheers for now. Over and out.